At the dawn of the 20th century, Great Britain had built the largest empire in history, upon which the sun never set. The British Empire covered a quarter of the world's land and ruled over 450 million inhabitants. For over a century, it had remained unchallenged as the foremost global power. Through the use of the Royal Navy, Britain ensured its dominance, ruling over the seas with the largest fleet the world had ever seen. However, the years of splendid isolation that Britain had enjoyed would come to an end. The emergence of the German Empire now saw the British challenged both militarily and economically. The German build-up of the Imperial Navy had led to a naval arms race between the two powers. Furthermore, assertive German foreign policy on the continent threatened Britain's desired balance of power in Europe. Therefore, in 1904, France and Britain ended their historical rivalry and formed the Entente Cordiale, followed up with the Anglo-Russian Entente 3 years later. Domestically, the nation was facing a growing political crisis as the issue of home rule for Ireland led to increasing tensions between the Irish Unionists and Nationalists. Overall, social dissatisfaction was spreading. The suffrage movement, fighting to give women the vote, was gaining momentum, and among the labour movement, discontent over wages had led to an increase in trade union membership, and between 1911 and 1914, a period dubbed the Great Labour Unrest saw over 3,000 strikes. French syndicalist and anarchist ideas had further crept into Britain and influenced the trade unions during this time. Finally, as the July crisis of 1914 unfolded, Britain repeatedly offered to mediate the deteriorating situation, but was ignored. As Europe spiralled further towards conflict, the British government decided to uphold the Treaty of London and defend Belgian neutrality. On Monday the 3rd of August, Germany declared war on France and soon launched its invasion of Belgium. On the eve of war, the British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey remarked, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." On August 4th, 1914, the United Kingdom declared war on Germany. Thousands gathered outside Buckingham Palace to show their support for their king and their country. The British people united and truly believed that war would be over by Christmas. The realities of war would soon prove otherwise. Men from all over the empire were called to fight. Vast resources of the colonies and dominions would provide invaluable support. By the closure of the First Battle of the Aisne, Britain had already suffered terrible losses. The hopes of a short war faded as trench warfare set in on the Western Front, and movement ground to a halt. The casualties would only grow as waves of men were continually sent over the top in the hopes of achieving a decisive breakthrough. With the entry of the Ottoman Empire into the war, the British and French opened an overseas front to force the Dardanelles and occupy Constantinople. French, British and Anzac forces landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula, but faced stiff resistance from the Ottoman defenders. Each Allied assault was repelled, and by mid-January 1916, the campaign was abandoned and the Allied forces withdrawn. This was a military disaster for the Entente powers, and a baptism of fire for the Australian and New Zealand soldiers. Meanwhile, closer to the home front, the pro-independence Irish volunteers were plotting a national uprising. On Easter Monday 1916, revolutionaries seized the General Post Office in Dublin. Patrick Pearse, one of the rebels' leaders, read a proclamation of a new provisional Irish government. "We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. British reinforcements swiftly crushed the revolutionaries, shelling the GPO building. Dublin was in flames. In the following days, the British government ordered the execution of 15 of the rebel leaders by firing squad. This would prove to be a fateful decision. The Easter Rising had not initially enjoyed strong popular support, but the brutality of the British response would incense the Irish public and lead to rapid growth in support for the revolutionary cause. Back on the Western Front, the Allied effort continued in vain. The battles of the Somme and Passchendaele had resulted in overwhelming losses. In the Middle East, however, Britain was making significant gains against the Ottomans. The Arab Revolt was underway, supported by Lawrence of Arabia. British forces had captured Baghdad earlier in the year, and just before Christmas 1917, captured the Holy City of Jerusalem. As 1918 opened, the fall of Russia allowed thousands of German divisions to head west. The Entente decided their only choice was to launch a massive offensive to defeat Germany before it was too late. The Allies launched their combined offensive, attacking at 5 points along the front, but quickly became bogged down and unable to overcome the strong defences of the Hindenburg Line. The offensive was ultimately a costly failure, causing over 800,000 Entente casualties. The French army was now on its last legs. As for the British army, they were now in desperate need of more manpower. Consequently, the British government decided to impose conscription on Ireland. This unpopular policy would lead to widespread unrest. The current president of Sinn Féin, Eamon de Valera, declared a total boycott of the draft. For this, de Valera was arrested and imprisoned in England. Strikes and riots soon engulfed the island. Westminster, hoping to resolve the situation, chose to bring in the promised Home Rule to mollify the nationalist opposition. This would backfire, as Sinn Féin would sweep the 1918 Home Rule elections, decimating the Irish Parliamentary Party. Sinn Féin convened its own legislative assembly, Dáil Éireann, claiming to be the sole legitimate government of Ireland and declaring the establishment of a new Irish Republic. We solemnly declare foreign government in Ireland to be an invasion of our national right, which we will never tolerate, and we demand the evacuation of our country by the English garrison. The same day, a unit of the Irish Republican Army, Sinn Féin's military arm, ambushed and killed 2 constables of the Royal Irish Constabulary. This was the beginning of the Irish War of Independence. A few months later, on March 2, 1919, the Germans unleashed their great offensive, breaking through the Allied lines and striking at Reims to split the French and British armies in 2. The sudden wedge ended all pretense of joint leadership, as both communications and supply lines were cut. The retreat of the French army away from Paris made the British positions indefensible. The British Expeditionary Force began a fighting retreat to the coast. As France fell to the German onslaught, most of the British army was successfully evacuated at Dieppe, back to Britain. Despite losing the continent, the coalition government led by Prime Minister David Lloyd George vowed to continue the war. The Royal Navy's Grand Fleet still maintained vital dominance over the English Channel and the North Sea. The British Commander-in-Chief, Sir Douglas Haig, urged all forces and allies to carry on the fight. There is no other course open to us but to fight it out. Every position must be held to the last man. There must be no retirement. With our backs to the wall and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. The safety of our homes and the freedom of mankind alike depend on the conduct of each one of us at this critical moment. Back in Ireland, the German Empire had officially recognised the Irish state and was now supplying the IRA. The British government had decided the Royal Irish Constabulary was incapable of defeating the rebels and would need reinforcements. As neither government had made a declaration of war, the British could not legally deploy their army. Therefore, a new auxiliary unit was created, made up of troops fresh from the European theatre. These became known as the Black and Tans. Rather than conduct conventional warfare, the IRA pursued a guerrilla campaign with sporadic attacks against the Crown forces. In late 1919, the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet collided once again in the Second Battle of Jutland. For the British, this was their attempt to win a much-needed morale boost. The battle ended in a stalemate, with the High Seas Fleet remaining a threat as a fleet in being. In the aftermath, support for the government and the war plummeted. Prime Minister David Lloyd George had no choice but to enter negotiations with the Central Powers. On the 24th of December 1919, the ceasefire of Copenhagen was signed. By mid-1920, the tide of the war in Ireland was shifting. The Black and Tans had responded to IRA attacks by carrying out brutal reprisals against civilians. News of the atrocities spread to the British press and gradually turned public opinion against the continuation of the war. Over in the Middle East, the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire remained at war. British forces still occupied valuable territory and were unwilling to make peace without gaining anything. It was the only bargaining chip they had left. The United States opted to serve as an impartial mediator to resolve the conflict. A conference was called in Jerusalem. After lengthy discussions, the Jerusalem Accord was signed, ending the war between the British Empire and the Ottomans. The signing of the peace led to the establishment of autonomous and international zones in the Basra Vilayet and the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem. Entering 1921, Ireland was now considered a lost cause, with growing anti-war sentiment and bankruptcy looming. Westminster sought an exit from the war and signed a truce with the Irish. Following tense negotiations, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. Ireland would become a self-governing republic, but was to remain in external association with Britain. It also provided Northern Ireland, which had been created by the Government of Ireland Act 1920, the option of entering into the Republic within 5 years of the treaty coming into effect. A few months later, the German Empire and the Entente entered into negotiations to conclude the war. The German government offered the remaining Entente powers a peace with honour, offering to take no annexations in exchange for the return of German colonies and acknowledging the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. The peace with honour was signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1921. 7 long years of devastating war had come to an end. Over 750,000 men had perished. A generation sacrificed. Never before had the country experienced losses on such a scale. Those who returned home began to ask the question, what was it all for? The transition to peace would be problematic. The nation was deep in debt and there was growing unrest across the empire. The promises of a land fit for heroes appeared not to be true. Prime Minister David Lloyd George now faced widespread criticism and became derided as the man who lost the war. His coalition government would soon fall apart and be replaced by a Conservative majority government led by Prime Minister Andrew Bonar Law. The British economy was facing many issues. The slow demobilisation of the army had led to growing unemployment. Throughout Britain, ex-servicemen, disillusioned with the state of things, turned to labour and radicalism. Strikes and protests became commonplace and raised fears of serious civil unrest, even revolution. The efforts of Germany to set up a Middle Europa had resulted in Britain largely being cut off from trade with much of Europe. In response, the Law government substantially increased tariffs to reinvigorate the British economy. Militarily, the UK government maintained a high military budget to compete with Germany, with a particular focus on the dreadnought race to ensure that Britain remained the undisputed master of the seas. The victory of the French Communards in the French Civil War had deeply influenced the extreme left of British society. The constant paranoia of a Red Uprising caused the government to introduce the Emergency Powers Act to contain strikers. The act compared to previous wartime restrictions. The various socialist parties in Britain merged to found the Syndicalist Party of Great Britain. This new party would rapidly grow and rise to prominence. The increase in political tension was a reflection of the general frustration and disillusionment in British society. In late 1922, Stanley Baldwin, the inexperienced Chancellor of the Exchequer, was sent to the United States to negotiate the repayment of Britain's war debts. Baldwin's inexperience led to him agreeing to pay £40 million a year instead of the government's estimated £16 million a year. This caused a major political scandal, with the press promoting the notion that the Tory government was more interested in lining the pockets of Americans rather than the welfare of the British people. The following year, Prime Minister Law resigned due to terminal throat cancer. His protégé, Austen Chamberlain, became the new leader, and the 1923 general election was called. The election saw the Labour Party come into force, led by the charismatic and reformist Ramsay MacDonald. Labour won the election advocating for defence cuts to alleviate the rising poverty in the country. Appointed Prime Minister, MacDonald wanted to prove that the first Labour government was fit to govern. Therefore, he decided to play down Labour's policies so as not to alienate voters, and in so doing, angered those within his party and the syndicalists. Eventually, allegations of shielding revolutionary influences saw the Tories and Liberals pass a vote of no confidence, bringing down the Labour ministry. After the next election, the Conservatives and Liberals formed a national government, led under the Tory leader, Austen Chamberlain. To unburden the economy, they brought forward an austerity budget, heavily cutting public spending. All branches of the armed forces had their wages cut, and further investment in the dreadnought race ended. Thousands of dock workers were now out of work. The national government's budget sparked outrage across the nation. On May 18th, the HMS Hood docked at Devonport. The crew, learning of the pay cuts, turned mutinous, refusing to obey the ship's officers. Assembling in crowds on the decks, they began to sing the red flag. The news spread, and a crowd gathered at the dock to show their support. The police attempted to arrest the sailors, but faced intimidation from the protesters. An order came through for the police to disperse the crowd, prompting violent resistance against law enforcement. This led to a riot, and sympathy strikes breaking out in Plymouth. The following day, the Transport and General Workers Union, the TGWU, announced a solidarity strike. Fearing the beginning of a French-style revolution, the government convened an emergency session of Parliament and rushed through a bill outlawing the TGWU and suspended the right of transport workers to strike, outraging the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Arthur James Cook, the leader of the syndicalist-aligned Miners' Federation of Great Britain, declared that his union would join the strike. The situation escalated, with the police engaged in mass arrests, leading to chaos on the streets. Numerous territorial army barracks went into mutiny. The Trade Union Congress, the TUC, issued an emergency declaration announcing a general strike. The British government ordered the army to mobilise, to support the police in breaking up strikes and even forcing workers to resume critical jobs. By September, 3.5 million workers were on strike. On September 5th, a crowd of strikers in the small town of Port Talbot in South Wales marched in the direction of inexperienced soldiers guarding the docks. One private panicked and opened fire, leading to other soldiers opening fire, leaving 5 strikers dead before the rest fled. The town was placed under curfew, and later that night the nearby barracks were stormed by furious miners. The next day, 3 words appeared on the front page of the daily papers: murder, gunfire, revolution. The Syndicalist Party called for the Port Talbot uprising to be imitated. Violence between police and strikers brutally increased, reaching Newcastle, Liverpool and even London. Parliament quickly outlawed the Syndicalist Party, the Trade Union Congress and the Independent Labour Party. Parliamentary immunity was violated with the arrest of several members for sedition and incitement to mutiny. Labour, outraged at this, rallied behind the radical trade unionists. Rumours of workers' communes being declared panicked the Chamberlain government. The government declared a state of emergency and began to mobilise the territorial army. Barricades, military checkpoints and barbed wire sprung up over London. To stop the radicals, troops were ordered to open fire into crowds. This led to a flood of desertions by men unwilling to obey such orders. As government forces attempted to enforce their authority, chaotic, low-intensity battlefields arose in cities such as Glasgow, Manchester and Liverpool. The revolution had begun. A large group of the Liberal Party abandoned the ruling coalition and petitioned King George V to dissolve Parliament and call for a general election. Despite his tacit sympathies with the striking workers, the King refused. Weeks later, George Lansbury, leader of the Labour Party, spoke at his party conference denouncing the monarchy and condemned George V's political meddling, making an ominous threat. A few centuries ago, one king who stood up against the common people of that day lost his head. Really lost it. The Labour Party was soon outlawed, and all Labour members of Parliament remaining in London were arrested for high treason. As the war spread, Cardiff became the first major city to fall to the revolution, a city commune proclaimed. The rest of Wales was placed under martial law by the government. French Communard agents made contact with the Cardiff commune and agreed to send munitions and advisors. Much of Wales quickly fell. The victory in Cardiff emboldened rebels in Scotland to storm the government buildings in Glasgow and Edinburgh. The rebels agreed to link up to secure the rail lines, beginning the bloody Battle of the Railways. The inexperienced militia was able to overwhelm the pincered British army and force the Royalists to withdraw from the heart of Scotland. The victorious syndicalists proclaimed a provisional Scottish government. The police, army and navy were suffering thousands of desertions. Military ranks were refilled with ex-servicemen, most notably former Black and Tans. Many of these became notorious for their ill discipline and harsh treatment of civilians. Shocked by this, many citizens flocked to join the rebel ranks. On December 14th, the Free City of Liverpool was declared. In the opening of 1925, the Welsh syndicalists advanced into England. Gloucester and Bristol would fall by January 8th. Revolutionary delegates convened in Liverpool to establish a provisional government. On February 20th, they issued the Liverpool Manifesto, declaring the Union of Britain. A new federal republic. George Lansbury was appointed its first president, and Arthur Cook as chairman of the Ministerial Council, leaving the president as a more ceremonial role. The British Army was now in full retreat across Britain's industrial heartland. In spring, martial law was extended to the rest of the United Kingdom. The royal family was evacuated to Canada under the guise of a state visit. This caused a flood of people to cash in their assets and attempt to flee the country, clogging Britain's southern ports. In Birmingham, the Labour MP and activist Oswald Mosley delivered a series of speeches that convinced a revolutionary mob to seize control of the city. Later in July, the Republican military, now containing an air branch, attacked Nottingham. The government ordered the remains of the Royal Navy to begin evacuating people to Canada, along with much of the sitting government. The beginning of heavy autumn rain slowed the advance of the Republican Army. Canada started to mobilize to send reinforcements. The French Communards joined the war and assisted the Republican Army in launching a proto-commando raid on Southampton on December 8th, while the French Navy raided Plymouth. This allowed breakthroughs in pushing toward the south coast. The British government in London abandoned the city and fled. The United Kingdom had fallen. On the radio, Prime Minister Austen Chamberlain announced that the government was ceasing armed resistance to the advancing syndicalist traitors, but that in the fullness of time, His Majesty's government would return and restore order to Britain. To be continued. Join us next time for part 2 of the Union of Britain.